The street was quiet that evening, until the low, steady hum of an engine broke the silence. Heads turned as a sleek black limousine glided to a stop in front of a crumbling, weathered house. Curtains were pulled back, neighbors stepped out to their porches, whispers spread like fire. From behind the tinted glass, the door opened slowly, and out stepped a young woman. Her heels clicked against the pavement, her dress shimmered beneath the setting sun, and her head was held high with the kind of confidence that made people stare in awe. Her presence was commanding, almost regal. But for those who lived on this street, the shock wasn't just about the car or the elegance or the wealth she radiated. It was about recognition, because this wasn't a stranger. This was the same girl who had once walked down this very road in tears, carrying nothing but a torn bag and a broken heart. The same girl who had been thrown out of this house, humiliated and abandoned with no one to defend her. The neighbors exchanged uneasy glances, their murmurs heavy with disbelief. How could it be? 5 years ago she had left with nothing, no money, no shelter, no hope, and yet here she was, returning in a limousine, dressed like a woman who had conquered the world. The old wooden door of the house creaked open slightly. A figure peered out, then pulled back quickly as if ashamed or afraid. The young woman noticed, but she didn't flinch. She simply adjusted her coat, her expression unreadable, and began walking slowly toward the house that had once rejected her. The narrator's voice lowers, drawing the audience closer. But how did this transformation happen? How does a girl who once begged for a roof over her head return with the power to silence an entire street? And what story hides behind those eyes? Eyes that once knew only tears, now burning with unshakable resolve. Her hand reached out toward the rusted gate. For a moment, the street seemed to hold its breath, because this wasn't just a homecoming, it was the beginning of a reckoning. The kind of reckoning that forces everyone to remember what they once tried to forget. And so, her story begins. Before the limo, before the whispers, before the stunned silence of her return, there was another story. A story few cared to remember, but one that carved every scar she carried in her heart. 5 years ago, this same girl was nothing more than a shadow in her own home. Her name was Amara, a name once spoken with affection by her late mother, but now treated like a burden by those who should have cared for her most. After her mother's passing, her father remarried quickly. He brought another woman into the house, promising stability and love, but what entered instead was cruelty disguised behind a forced smile. The stepmother had no warmth for Amara. From the very first day, her eyes carried resentment. Her voice sharpened with disdain. "You eat too much," she would say. "You're lazy, good for nothing. Why should I waste money on your schooling?" And so, while other girls her age walked proudly in pressed uniforms, books in hand, Amara remained at home, scrubbing floors, washing clothes, and serving meals she was never allowed to enjoy fully. Her father? He was there, but not really. Work consumed him. And when he was home, he turned a blind eye to the whispers, the insults, the bruises hidden behind Amara's smile. Perhaps he told himself it wasn't his battle. Perhaps he chose silence because silence was easier. But for Amara, that silence was betrayal. Every morning she rose before the sun, her hands raw from laundry, her back aching from endless chores. Every night she went to bed with an empty stomach, her stepmother ensuring that unworthy mouths ate last. And yet, in her eyes, there was always a quiet spark. A spark her stepmother noticed, and hated. For even in rags, even with a broom in her hand, Amara's spirit whispered of something greater. One evening, when Amara timidly asked if she could attend school, clutching a worn notebook she had found in the trash, her stepmother's laughter filled the room. "School? For you? Who will pay the fees? Who will cook? Who will clean? No, girl, your place is here, on your knees, not in classrooms." The words cut deeper than any whip. But Amara held back her tears, swallowing the humiliation. That night she opened the discarded notebook under the dim light of a flickering candle. She traced the letters she barely knew, teaching herself silently while the rest of the house slept. It was her little rebellion, her secret escape. Days turned into years. The chores multiplied, the insults never stopped. But Amara kept writing in that notebook, page after page, dream after dream, until the day everything shattered. Her stepmother, furious over a broken plate, screamed that Amara was nothing but a curse. "You are not welcome here. Pack your things and leave." Her father stood nearby, silent once again. His eyes dropped to the floor, refusing to meet his daughter's pleading gaze. In that silence, Amara heard her answer. She was unwanted, and so, with nothing but a torn bag, a faded dress, and tears burning her cheeks, Amara walked out of the house that was never truly hers. The neighbors had watched that night too, their eyes full of judgment, not compassion. To them, she was just another girl cast out, another forgotten soul swallowed by hardship. But what they never saw was the spark she carried with her, a spark that one day would return not in rags, but in glory. There comes a moment in every storm when the wind howls its loudest, when the rain falls its heaviest and the breaking point. For Amara, that moment arrived on a night she would never forget. It began with something so small, so trivial, that it could have been solved with a word of kindness. But in that house, kindness had long been buried. A gold bracelet was missing. Her stepmother's voice thundered through the rooms, sharp and accusing. "Where is it? Who touched my things?" The house fell silent except for the trembling breath of Amara, who stood frozen in the corner. She hadn't even seen the bracelet, let alone touched it. But her stepmother's eyes locked on her like a predator finding prey. "You," she hissed. "It was you." "I should have known." Amara's eyes widened. No, I didn't. I swear I didn't take anything." But the accusations came like daggers. Every protest she uttered was twisted, mocked, silenced. The stepmother's words dripped with venom. "Liar! Ungrateful wretch! After all we've done for you, this is how you repay us?" Her father was there too, standing in the shadows, his face pale, his lips sealed. He could have spoken. He could have defended his daughter. But his silence was louder than any insult. The neighbors had gathered outside, drawn by the shouting. Whispers spread like wildfire. Amara stole, Amara betrayed her own family. Tears welled in her eyes as she tried again, her voice breaking. "Please, I didn't take it." "I would never." But no one listened. No one believed. The verdict was swift. The punishment merciless. "Pack your things," her stepmother spat. "This house is no longer yours." Her trembling hands gathered the little she owned, a faded dress, a worn-out notebook, a single pair of sandals, a small bag far too small to carry the weight of a broken heart. And then, the door. It slammed behind her with a finality that echoed down the street. Her stepmother's voice carried after her like poison. "Never come back." Amara stood in the darkness, her bag clutched against her chest, tears streaming down her face. The neighbors stared, some with pity, most with judgment. No one moved to help. No one spoke to defend her. She sank to her knees on the cold ground, her sobs lost in the night. The house that should have been her shelter had become her executioner. The people who should have been her protectors had turned into her jailers. And as the moonlight spilled over her fragile figure, one truth cut deeper than all the rest: she was utterly, completely alone. That night she walked away from the house she once called home. Each step was heavy, her sandals scraping the dirt, her tears blurring the path ahead. She had no destination, no plan, no hope, only the cruel memory of voices that called her a thief, a liar, a curse. The city lights flickered in the distance, cold and unforgiving. She wandered toward them, a small figure swallowed by the night, and the narrator's voice lingers, pulling the audience closer. No one believed she would survive a single night on her own. But fate had a story far greater waiting for her. The first night was the hardest. Amara wandered the streets until her legs gave way. She curled up beneath the shade of an abandoned stall, her bag serving as a pillow, her stomach hollow with hunger. The stars looked down on her, cold and distant, offering no comfort. The world had cast her aside, and for the first time she understood what it meant to be invisible. Days blurred into one another. She begged for scraps at the market, only to be shooed away by shopkeepers who saw her as nothing more than a nuisance. Her clothes grew dirtier, her face thinner, her eyes dimmer. She searched trash bins for bread crusts, drank water from public taps, and slept wherever the night caught her. The insults cut deeper than the hunger. Thief, street rat, worthless girl. Every word reminded her of the lie that had driven her out of her home. Yet, despite the cruelty, something within Amara refused to break. Each morning she forced herself to rise, to walk, to search. She cleaned cars for a few coins, carried baskets for strangers, even sang softly in corners of the market just to earn a little food. The world tested her, but she endured, and then, exhausted and hungry, Amara saw an elderly woman stumble while carrying a heavy basket of fruits. Without hesitation, Amara rushed forward, steadying her trembling hands and gathering the scattered fruits from the ground. The old woman looked at her closely, not with disdain, but with curiosity. "Child," she asked softly, "what is your name?" "Amara," she whispered, unsure if honesty would bring kindness or cruelty. The woman studied her torn dress, her tired face, her eyes filled with both sorrow and strength. Then instead of pushing her away, she smiled. "You have a good heart, Amara. Come with me." That night, for the first time in weeks, Amara slept under a roof. The old woman offered her a small corner in her modest home, a warm plate of food, and words she hadn't heard in so long. "You are safe here." In the days that followed, the woman, known to the neighborhood as Mama Grace, began to notice something extraordinary about Amara. Despite her hardships, she was quick to learn, eager to help, and carried herself with a quiet dignity. One evening, Mama Grace handed Amara a book. "Read to me," she said. Amara hesitated, then began softly, her voice trembling at first, then growing stronger. Page by page, word by word, the story unfolded, and Mama Grace's eyes shone with amazement. "You have a gift," she whispered. "A sharp mind, a voice that carries." From that day, Mama Grace became more than a shelter. She became a mentor. She encouraged Amara to study again, to dream again, to believe again. Slowly, the girl who had been cast into the streets began to see herself not as a victim, but as someone destined for something greater, and the narrator's voice deepens, drawing the audience closer. In the ashes of her suffering, a new flame was kindled. Amara's struggle had not broken her. It had carved her into someone stronger. But little did she know, this was only the beginning of her transformation. For the first time in years, Amara felt the warmth of possibility. The streets no longer defined her. The insults no longer chained her spirit. Under Mama Grace's guidance, she began to rebuild herself, piece by fragile piece. Days turned into weeks and weeks into months. Every morning she rose before dawn, helping Mama Grace in the little market stall. She carried baskets, arranged fruits neatly, greeted customers with a soft smile. Though the work was humble, Amara treated it like a sacred duty. With each coin she earned, she tucked away a silent promise in her heart. "I will never be the broken girl they once cast aside." But Mama Grace had seen something deeper in her, a sharpness in her eyes, a hunger not just for food but for knowledge. And so one evening she placed a stack of old books before Amara. "Read," she said gently. "Your mind is your true treasure." Amara devoured the pages like a starving soul. By candlelight, long after the market had closed, she studied. Letters turned into words, words into ideas, ideas into dreams. Her determination was relentless. She scribbled notes on scraps of paper, whispered lessons to herself, and tested her memory until the early hours of dawn. Her efforts did not go unnoticed. A local teacher passing by the market paused one afternoon as Amara explained the sums of change with startling speed. Impressed, he offered to mentor her. With Mama Grace's blessing, Amara enrolled in evening classes. There, among students who once mocked her kind, she stood tall, her posture straight, her voice clear. No longer was she the timid girl who hid in corners. Each lesson mastered, each test completed became another brick in the foundation of her new self. But her rise was not just in books. Amara began noticing opportunities where others saw none. With the little money she saved, she purchased extra fruits, turned them into juices, and sold them in jars. What began as a simple idea grew steadily. Customers returned, impressed not only by the taste but by the spark in the young woman who served them. One day, Mama Grace looked at her with pride shimmering in her tired eyes. "You are building something, child, not just for yourself but for the life that awaits you." Amara smiled, though behind her smile burned a vow. She would succeed not just to survive, but to prove wrong every voice that once called her worthless. Seasons passed, and with each one, her transformation became harder to ignore. The girl in tattered clothes had become a young woman with grace in her steps, fire in her spirit, and vision in her heart. She spoke with confidence, carried herself with dignity, and looked at the world not as a victim but as a challenger. Late one night, as she stood before a cracked mirror, she barely recognized herself. Her hands were still rough from work, her eyes still bore the shadow of past tears, But there was something new. Strength, determination, a beauty born not of comfort, but of resilience. And as the narrator's voice deepens, pulling the audience into her journey, she had risen from ashes. She had built herself with nothing but grit and faith, and though she had vowed never to look back, destiny had its own plans, for soon the road she had left behind would call her once more. The sun was sinking low when the long black limousine glided into the narrow street. Its polished surface reflected the evening light, a sight so foreign to the neighborhood that people dropped what they were doing and stared. Children pointed, women whispered, and men leaned against their door frames, craning their necks to see. The car slowed, then came to a perfect stop right in front of the old, weathered house, the very house that had once cast her out. For a moment silence swept the street, and then the door opened. A tall young woman stepped out. Her heels touched the ground softly, yet with a power that echoed louder than thunder in the ears of those who watched. She was dressed with elegance, her hair neatly styled, her movements graceful. To the neighbors, she looked like someone out of a dream, someone far removed from the dusty lanes of their small community. But to those who lived inside that house, her face was not a stranger. Gasps broke out. Eyes widened. A murmur ran through the crowd like ripples in water. It's her, Amara, the very girl they had once mocked, beaten with words, and thrown to the streets now stood before them, radiant, unrecognizable, powerful. Her stepmother, peeking from the doorway, froze as if the ground beneath her feet had vanished. Her father, older now, thinner, stepped forward uncertainly, his lips trembling as if trying to form her name. Jealous cousins, neighbors who had whispered her shame years ago, now stared with disbelief, some with envy, others with guilt. And Amara, she stood tall, her face calm, her eyes scanning the house that had once been her prison. She remembered every tear shed on that doorstep, every insult hurled into her ears. And yet here she was, walking back not with despair but with dignity. Each step she took was slow, deliberate, heavy with meaning. Her heels clicked against the stone path, and with every sound, tension deepened. What would she do? Would she forgive them? Would she unleash her anger? The crowd held its breath. Her father whispered hoarsely, "Amara, is it really you?" She did not answer. Not yet. Her silence was sharper than any words, and her presence louder than any shout. She walked past the stunned neighbors, past the trembling stepmother, until she stood once more at the threshold of that house. The same door that had slammed in her face years ago now stood open, uncertain, waiting. Amara paused. Her hand hovered near the frame, her eyes glistening with memories. The night she had been cast out, the tears that burned her cheeks, the weight of loneliness crushing her heart. But those memories no longer broke her. They had forged her. And as she finally stepped inside, the narrator's voice lingers, stretching the suspense. She returned not as the weak girl they once rejected, but as a woman the world could no longer ignore. But the question remained, would her return bring forgiveness? Or reckoning? Inside the familiar walls of the house, silence stretched like a wound. The same walls that once echoed with her cries now trembled with the weight of her return. Her stepmother stood rigid, arms crossed, but her eyes betrayed unease. Her father, frail and guilty, avoided her gaze. Neighbors pressed closer to the windows, desperate to witness the moment. And Amara, she stood at the center, her presence commanding the space like never before. Her voice broke the silence, steady yet burning with years of pain. 5 years ago, she began, her eyes fixed on her stepmother. You threw me out into the streets with nothing but a small bag and my tears. You called me a thief. You said I was nothing, that I would never survive a single night on my own. Her words pierced through the air like arrows. The stepmother flinched but said nothing. Amara's gaze swept across the room, then landed on her father. And you stood in silence. The man who was supposed to protect me, the one I called father, chose silence over truth. Do you know what that silence cost me? Her father's lips trembled. His eyes filled with shame, but no words came. Amara drew in a deep breath. But look at me now. Do I look like someone who broke? No. I stand here today as a woman you can never break again. Tears welled in her eyes, but they did not weaken her voice. They only made it stronger. This house tried to bury me, but the world outside, it shaped me, strengthened me, and gave me wings. And while you cursed me, I learned. The neighbors outside leaned in, waiting for the final verdict. Would she forgive? Or would she condemn? Amara turned her eyes toward the doorway, then back to her family. A faint smile touched her lips, not of joy but of freedom. I do not return to beg nor to prove myself to you. My life speaks louder than your words ever did. You may keep your guilt, your regret, your bitterness. I have no use for them. Her stepmother's voice cracked. Amara, wait. But Amara raised a hand, silencing her. I forgive you, not for your sake, but for mine, because I will not carry your cruelty any longer. But forgiveness does not mean I belong here again. She turned toward the door, her steps graceful, her head held high. And as she walked past the stunned crowd, the narrator's voice lingers. She left not in anger, but in triumph. For true victory is not revenge, and it is freedom, and Amara was free at last. And so Amara walked away, not with anger burning in her chest, but with peace flowing through her soul. She had faced the voices that once crushed her, and she had risen above them. The street that once mocked her now watched in stunned silence, but the question remains, what would you do if those who once betrayed you came begging at your feet? Would you extend your hand to lift them, or would you let them taste the bitterness they once served you? For some, success is the sweetest revenge, to rise so high that those who doubted you can only watch from the ground below. But for others, forgiveness is the truest victory, to let go of the chains of the past and walk freely into the future. Which path would you choose? Amara chose to forgive, but not to return. Yet her story is not over, because life has a way of revealing truths long buried. What if the betrayal she suffered was never about a bracelet? What if there was a hidden truth, a secret that explained why she was cast out? What if her real parents, the ones she never knew, were still out there, waiting to be found? The night may have closed one chapter of Amara's life, but it may just have opened the door to another. And as her limousine disappeared into the distance, one thought lingered in the hearts of all who watched. This was not the end. It was only the beginning. Now I turn to you. Do you believe success is the best revenge, or is forgiveness the true victory? What do you think lies ahead for Amara? Will she discover the truth about her past? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video if Amara's journey touched your heart, and subscribe to the channel so you never miss what happens next. Because sometimes the story doesn't end when the girl walks away. Sometimes it only begins.